Some secrets sit quietly inside polished walls, waiting for the right moment to change everything. In Miami, one man's plan to control the future of his family was about to awaken a story no one could predict. Chapter 1: The CEO's Plan. Charles Donovan had built an empire from nothing but relentless hours, sharp instincts, and the refusal to lose. People in Florida whispered his name in boardrooms and luxury golf clubs. To the outside world, he was the image of success. To himself, he was a man who could not accept loose ends. The Donovan headquarters looked like a fortress of glass and steel, tall against the Miami skyline. Inside his corner office, Charles sat behind a desk that seemed almost too large, the polished surface reflecting the restless tapping of his fingers. He had won deals against rivals, survived financial storms, and earned the loyalty of investors. Yet one thought kept returning to him like an unfinished sentence. His son, Benjamin Donovan, was 25. Tall, quiet, careful in his words. To many, he looked like a dream candidate for the next heir of the Donovan name. But Charles saw something else. He saw a boy who lived without urgency, without a partner, without a plan to carry the Donovan legacy forward. At business dinners, colleagues often asked polite questions. "Is Benjamin seeing anyone?" They smiled, but Charles heard judgment hidden inside their tone. He hated that. In his mind, power was not only about money. It was about the story people told when they mentioned your family. A powerful man could not allow whispers about weakness or failure. And for Charles, Benjamin's single life had become a weak spot. Charles leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline. Miami sun spilled golden light into the room, but his thoughts were darker. He remembered his own youth, how choices once spun out of control, how passion had once dictated decisions instead of logic. He had promised himself never again to let emotions lead. That promise shaped him into the cold and precise man he was today. Now he believed he had the solution. If Benjamin would not find someone suitable on his own, Charles would choose for him. It was not the first time he had stepped into his son's life. And in his eyes, it was not control. It was responsibility. The name came to him almost naturally. Katherine Tran. Katherine had been his secretary for several years. Reliable, discreet, polite in every situation. She understood the rhythm of his business, the sharp pace of his meetings, the importance of silence at the right moment. Charles respected efficiency above all, and Katherine delivered it daily without complaint. She kept his calendar running like a perfect clock. She handled paperwork before he even asked. When she walked into the room, she carried calm with her. Most importantly, she was unconnected to the gossip of Miami high society. She had no baggage that could embarrass the Donovan family name. Charles valued that almost more than anything else. He imagined Benjamin and Katherine together. In his head it made sense. She was organized, intelligent, not flashy. Benjamin was steady, polite, often quiet to the point of invisibility. Together, Charles thought they could balance each other. Katherine could guide Benjamin in ways Charles could not. The more he considered it, the more it felt like a business deal. And Charles had never failed in business. Still, a shadow lingered somewhere at the edge of his mind when he thought about Katherine. Something unspoken, a memory buried deep in years past. He pushed it away. This was about Benjamin's future, not about the mistakes of another time. He rose from his desk and walked across the office. His reflection followed him in the glass wall. A tall man, graying at the temples, expression carved from discipline. He carried himself like someone who had already decided the outcome before the game began. And in truth, he had. Benjamin, however, was not like that. Charles knew his son preferred books to crowded rooms. He often spent hours in silence, sketching ideas on paper, never eager to share them. Friends came and went, but none stayed close. Benjamin seemed comfortable in his own small circle. Charles saw it as weakness. He believed the world rewarded those who stepped forward, who demanded attention. And yet his son continued to drift, content with quiet days and long walks along Biscayne Bay. Charles believed it was time to shake him from that pattern. Time to give him direction, whether he wanted it or not. He stood there, looking at the horizon, convinced that this plan would work. Katherine would be the answer. A controlled solution to a messy problem. But in the silence of the office, as the city buzzed far below, the memory returned again. Katherine's last name. Tran. It echoed like a whisper he did not want to hear. Charles forced himself to dismiss it. He had buried that chapter years ago. He would not let the past interrupt what needed to be done. Yet somewhere inside, the connection remained fragile and dangerous. He refused to speak it, even in his own thoughts. To him, Katherine was simply the right choice. Nothing more. The plan was clear. Benjamin would meet her, and the Donovan family image would finally be secured. Charles returned to his desk, calm settling over him like armor. Outside the window, the Miami skyline glowed as the sun began to sink, painting the sky in orange and purple. The city looked endless, but Charles only saw the narrow path he had carved for his family. He opened his notebook and wrote a single line, almost like an instruction to himself. Introduce Benjamin to Katherine. Simple, direct, unquestionable. He closed the notebook. The decision was made. What he could not see, what he refused to acknowledge, was how fragile his plan truly was. He believed control could solve anything. He believed family could be arranged like assets on a balance sheet. But secrets have a way of rising, no matter how deeply they are hidden. And behind Katherine's quiet smile, there was more history than Charles dared to remember. Chapter 2: The Awkward Date. Sometimes the most uncomfortable meetings are the ones that reveal the truth faster than any conversation. In a small Miami cafe, two young lives crossed paths, not with sparks of romance, but with silent questions no one dared to ask out loud. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and sugar, the kind of place where students studied late into the night and tourists stopped for air-conditioned relief. Outside, Miami heat pressed against the glass, turning every window into a mirror of light. Inside, Benjamin Donovan sat stiffly at a corner table, waiting for someone he had never wanted to meet. He adjusted his shirt, checked the watch on his wrist, and felt the familiar weight of obligation. This was not his idea. His father's voice echoed in his head like an order carved in stone. A date, a meeting, a chance to move forward, as Charles Donovan had put it. But to Benjamin, it felt like sitting for an interview he never applied for. His eyes wandered around the cafe. People laughed, couples leaned close, friends shared stories. He envied how natural they seemed. For him, every public moment carried pressure, as if he were performing in a play without ever knowing the script. He wondered what his father would think if he stood up and walked out before she arrived. He knew the answer. Charles would see it as weakness. So he stayed. Katherine Tran entered quietly, as if she belonged to the rhythm of the place. She carried herself with calm confidence, a balance between grace and simplicity. She spotted Benjamin immediately and approached with a polite smile. He nodded, stood halfway, then sat again, his movements awkward, his expression caught between duty and discomfort. The first minutes passed with small gestures. She placed her bag on the chair, folded her hands, and glanced at the menu. He stared at the condensation running down his water glass. Neither spoke much. The silence was heavy, though not unfriendly. It was the silence of two people who already knew the answer before the question was asked. Katherine studied him carefully, though she hid her thoughts behind a neutral expression. She noticed how his eyes avoided hers, how he seemed more focused on the corner of the table than on her presence. It was not rudeness. It was distance. And she recognized it quickly, the way someone who understands people does. This young man was not looking for her, or for anyone like her. In her mind, the situation almost became amusing. She had read stories, watched countless dramas where forced meetings led to secret romances. Yet here, sitting across from Benjamin Donovan, she felt no spark at all. Instead, she felt a quiet sympathy. He was polite, clearly kind in his own way, but his heart was not searching for a woman. She shifted in her seat and let her thoughts wander. There was a softness to Benjamin's face, not fragile but gentle. His eyes carried warmth when they dared to lift, a warmth that did not know where to rest. Katherine realized almost instantly that she was not his type. Not because of looks, not because of personality, but because his heart was shaped differently. A private laugh echoed in her head. She had always been the kind of person who noticed details others ignored. Friends once teased her about how quickly she could spot the truth in people. Some called it intuition, others called it obsession. She called it honesty. And her honesty now told her that Benjamin was not sitting here out of interest. He was sitting here out of duty. Benjamin's thoughts, meanwhile, moved in circles. He could feel her eyes on him, gentle but sharp. He wondered what she thought, wondered if she judged him as strange or cold. He hated that feeling, the sense of being measured. All his life, his father had measured him, comparing him to standards he never asked for. And now this meeting felt like another test. He looked around the cafe again. The laughter from another table, the sound of a spoon clinking against porcelain, even the faint hum of the air conditioner, all seemed louder than the space between them. He wanted to be anywhere else. He wanted to be free of the invisible strings that tied him to his father's expectations. The date moved slowly, though neither seemed eager to force words. A few comments about the weather, a short nod when the waiter passed by, but nothing that could pass for connection. Katherine, in her own way, began to relax. The pressure to impress was gone. She understood him, maybe more than he realized. She felt almost protective, as if she wanted to shield him from the invisible weight pressing on his shoulders. Her eyes softened. She thought of her brother, Thomas. He had carried burdens once, the kind that left marks no one could see. She remembered how he worked himself to exhaustion, how he sacrificed his own dreams to support their family. There was something in Benjamin's posture, in the quiet way he sat, that reminded her of Thomas. Both men lived under shadows larger than themselves. The thought planted itself firmly. Perhaps the answer her boss wanted was not the answer that made sense. Charles Donovan believed he could arrange lives like business contracts. But Katherine saw something else. She saw a young man searching for kindness, not control. She saw the possibility that her brother might understand him better than anyone else ever could. Benjamin, unaware of her thoughts, continued to wrestle with his own. He wondered if she saw through him, if she knew he was pretending. He hated pretending, yet he did it often. Pretending to be the son his father wanted. Pretending to be interested in paths that never called to him. Pretending to belong in rooms where conversations felt like battles. He took a slow breath and let his gaze rest on the window. Outside, cars passed by, palm trees swayed under the sun, life moved at its usual speed. Inside, time stretched, heavy but strangely revealing. For the first time, he felt someone was not demanding anything from him. Katherine did not push, did not judge. Her silence carried understanding, and that made him both grateful and uneasy. The awkwardness of the date never left, but it transformed. What began as forced politeness turned into quiet recognition. They both knew this was not a match. They both knew the purpose of the meeting would not be fulfilled. Yet, instead of disappointment, there was a sense of clarity. Katherine sipped her coffee, her thoughts circling back to Thomas once more. Her brother's face appeared in her mind, his quiet strength, his resilience, his complicated past. She imagined how he might react to Benjamin. Perhaps with patience, perhaps with empathy, perhaps even with something more. The idea felt dangerous, yet exciting. She smiled faintly to herself, though she quickly looked away so he would not notice. She understood something important. This date was not the beginning of her story with Benjamin. It was the beginning of another story, one that neither Charles nor Benjamin could see yet. And as the cafe door opened and new customers walked in, the Miami air carrying the noise of the city inside, Katherine felt certain of one thing. She was not the right person for Benjamin Donovan, but she knew who might be. Chapter 3. The Introduction of Thomas. Some stories refuse to stay buried. They wait in silence until a single memory, a single name, pulls them back into the light. For Katherine Tran, one evening conversation with her brother would reopen a history that once tied their family to the Donovan empire. The night air in Miami carried the sound of traffic and the faint scent of the ocean. Katherine sat by the window of her small apartment, replaying the awkward cafe meeting in her mind. The image of Benjamin Donovan lingered, the way he kept his eyes lowered, the quiet tension in his posture, the kindness hidden beneath the weight of expectation. She knew instantly that he was not meant for her. Yet her thoughts did not stop there. They reached further, toward the one person she trusted more than anyone else, her brother Thomas. Thomas Tran had always been the quiet strength of their family. He carried himself with dignity, a man of structure and design, someone who built stability with his own hands. By trade, he was an architect, but his life story was not a straight line. Before he designed buildings, he had learned how to navigate power. And that power had once belonged to Charles Donovan. Katherine leaned back, her mind drifting into memory. She remembered when Thomas was younger, still in his 20s, chasing opportunities while their family struggled. Their parents had worried about bills, about rent, about the uncertain future that seemed to hang above them. Thomas stepped forward without hesitation. He left his passion for architecture behind for a time and accepted a position that promised financial security. That position placed him directly in the shadow of Charles Donovan. At first, it seemed like a blessing. Charles paid well. He demanded loyalty, precision, and silence, and Thomas delivered all three. He became the assistant who never made mistakes, the man who organized schedules, reviewed contracts, and stood quietly behind the powerful figure everyone admired. To outsiders, Thomas looked fortunate. He was young, employed by one of the most respected CEOs in Miami. But Katherine remembered the nights when Thomas came home with eyes darker than usual, shoulders heavier than any workload could explain. He said little, but his silence revealed more than words ever could. She noticed the way he avoided questions, the way he closed his notebooks before she could glance at them. He was living under control, a control that extended beyond business. Charles Donovan was not an easy man. He had a presence that filled a room, a certainty that demanded compliance. For someone like Thomas, still young, still finding his own identity, that presence was both magnetic and suffocating. Charles offered guidance, but it came wrapped in dominance. He offered opportunity, but it came at the price of freedom. The relationship between them was not simple. There was admiration mixed with fear, a strange gravity that pulled Thomas closer even as he longed to break free. Katherine never asked for details, but she did not need to. She could feel the conflict in her brother's every movement. Eventually, Thomas reached a breaking point. She remembered the day he resigned. He stood taller, his eyes sharper, his voice steadier than she had ever heard before. He walked away from Charles Donovan, away from the office of glass and steel, away from the shadow that had both tempted and trapped him. He returned to his true path, to architecture, to sketches spread across the dining table, to designs that reflected freedom instead of control. It was not an easy decision. Money became tighter again. But Thomas carried no regret. He had traded security for independence, and that independence gave him back his spirit. Now, years later, Katherine sat by the window and thought of Benjamin. She thought of his hesitant smile, his careful silence, the way he seemed trapped in expectations he did not choose. She could not ignore the parallel. Benjamin was Charles's son, but in his eyes Katherine saw the same quiet struggle Thomas once carried. The idea formed slowly, then grew stronger with each breath. Perhaps Benjamin did not need someone like her. Perhaps what he needed was someone who understood the weight of living under Charles Donovan. Someone who had already escaped it. Her brother. The thought startled her, yet it refused to leave. She pictured Benjamin beside Thomas, the soft-spoken air beside the man who had once defied the CEO's control. She imagined how Thomas might react, whether he would see in Benjamin the same need for freedom, the same longing to be seen as more than a name or an asset. She allowed herself a small smile. It was not about matchmaking in the traditional sense. It was about connection. She wanted to protect Benjamin from the path her brother had once walked, and she wanted her brother to see that he was not alone in his scars. The room grew quieter as the city outside continued its restless rhythm. Katherine closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of memory and possibility settle together. She knew her boss, Charles, believed in control. He believed he could arrange futures like chess moves. But Katherine believed in something different. She believed in understanding, and she believed her brother and Benjamin might discover that in each other. She rose from the chair and gathered her thoughts. The night felt heavier now, filled with echoes of the past and hints of what could come. She did not know how the story would unfold, but she sensed it would not remain simple. Bringing Benjamin and Thomas into the same room would stir old shadows. The kind her boss had spent years pretending no longer existed. Still, she felt certain it was the right step. Her brother had once been caught in Charles Donovan's control. Benjamin was still living inside it. If their paths crossed, perhaps they could find freedom together. Katherine let out a quiet breath, steady and calm. She knew what she would do next. Chapter 4. Sparks between Benjamin and Thomas. Benjamin had never expected a single glance to upend his world, yet the moment he stepped into the room, everything shifted. Sparks can ignite where least expected, even between shadows of the past and hearts unprepared. The small Orlando gathering seemed ordinary at first glance. A few soft lights, a gentle hum of music, and the subtle clinking of glasses created a backdrop that should have been welcoming. For Benjamin, however, the air carried tension he could not immediately name. His thoughts were scattered, weighed by the knowledge that this meeting was orchestrated by Katherine, who had convinced him that attending was both prudent and harmless. He reminded himself of the intention: meet new people, explore connections, and perhaps contribute to a new social circle. Yet as he approached the center of the room, his eyes met another's, and a silent pause unfolded. Thomas stood by the refreshments, tall and composed, with a calm that belied the storm inside him. For a fraction of a second, Thomas froze. His mind was unprepared for the sight of Benjamin. The features, the posture, and the warmth in Benjamin's expression triggered memories he had tried to suppress. the long, controlling days under Charles Donovan, the blurred lines of affection and authority, and the relentless pull of power intertwined with intimacy. Thomas's chest tightened, and he fought the sudden rush of recollection that threatened to overwhelm him. Benjamin, unaware of the depth of Thomas's inner turmoil, carried a simple intention. He approached with an open demeanor, a slight nervousness in his steps, yet an unmistakable warmth in his gaze. His awkwardness was genuine, and in it lay an unpretentious honesty. He smiled lightly, feeling the first flicker of connection, unaware of how profound the impression he left would be. His heart, unaccustomed to such intensity, began to beat with a tentative hope, a curiosity that had been dormant under the weight of parental expectations and orchestrated social encounters. Thomas's mind spun. He recognized the echoes of Charles and Benjamin, yet there was a divergence too subtle to articulate immediately. Benjamin's presence lacked manipulation, control, or expectation. Instead, there was sincerity, a quiet strength in his hesitations and the way he carried himself. Thomas felt a contradiction, memory pulling him back into past complexities while the present unfolded with untainted possibility. The tension created by this duality was intoxicating, and Thomas felt a pull he had not anticipated. The room faded into background noise as their proximity drew focus. Benjamin, noticing only the warmth and attentiveness in Thomas's posture, felt a sense of ease he had rarely experienced. The usual social anxieties, the pressures from family and environment, seemed momentarily distant. Here, in the center of an ordinary gathering, a connection whispered possibilities that neither fully understood, but both sensed deeply. Katherine watched from a distance, a subtle smile on her lips. Her plan had been simple: orchestrate an encounter, create a space for interaction, and let natural affinity unfold. She observed the brief hesitation, the eye contact, and the unspoken tension, noting the slow emergence of something delicate yet powerful. Katherine's intuition told her that Benjamin's genuine warmth might reach Thomas in ways the past never allowed. She allowed herself a quiet satisfaction, aware that her interference was guided by care and insight rather than control. As Benjamin moved closer to Thomas, small gestures began to form a silent dialogue. A tilt of the head, a careful adjustment of posture, and the soft expression in Benjamin's eyes communicated more than words could. Thomas found himself responding unconsciously, mirroring subtleties in Benjamin's presence, a reflection of instinct and emerging curiosity. Every heartbeat seemed amplified, every glance heavy with unspoken possibility. Thomas struggled with the complexity of his feelings. He was drawn to Benjamin, yet wary of the shadows that lingered. The memory of Charles's influence loomed, a reminder that attraction and control had once been inseparable. He questioned the legitimacy of his emotions, fearing repetition of old entanglements, yet the undeniable authenticity of Benjamin's demeanor created an inner conflict he could not ignore. Each second intensified the magnetic pull, blending desire with caution, curiosity with restraint. Benjamin, for his part, sensed the subtle shifts. He noticed the brief tightening of Thomas's jaw, the careful steadiness in his posture, and the quick, almost imperceptible glances. While unsure of their origin, Benjamin felt a resonance, a silent acknowledgement of shared intensity. His inner thoughts wrestled with anticipation and uncertainty, navigating the fine line between hope and caution. Time slowed in that space, the usual flow of conversation and movement almost irrelevant. Benjamin and Thomas existed in a bubble of observation, emotion, and recognition. Thomas found himself measuring each reaction, parsing the truth from memory, attempting to reconcile past pain with present possibility. Benjamin remained anchored in simplicity, offering attentiveness, subtle humor, and genuine curiosity, an unfamiliar yet welcome pattern. The chemistry emerged quietly like embers beneath ash. There were no sudden declarations, no dramatic confessions, only a growing awareness of connection and potential. Benjamin's awkward sincerity contrasted with Thomas's experienced caution, creating a delicate equilibrium. Each moment added weight, each glance a layer, building tension without articulation, allowing the heart to speak where words could not. Katherine, satisfied with the unfolding subtlety, allowed them space. She recognized that interference now would disrupt the fragile balance. Her role transitioned from orchestrator to observer, providing quiet protection while allowing natural development. She understood the stakes: past influence, emotional history, and parental control could disrupt the connection if not approached with care. Patience and discretion became her guiding principles. As the evening progressed, Benjamin and Thomas navigated minor interactions with others, yet their attention remained intermittently on one another. Small coincidences, a shared smile over a humorous observation, simultaneous reactions to music, or a mutual glance across the room, served to reinforce the growing bond. Each occurrence was subtle, yet cumulatively significant, laying the foundation for trust and emerging attachment. The night ended not with clarity, but with the promise of potential. Thomas, reflecting on the evening, felt both intrigue and wariness. The echoes of Charles remained, a shadow lingering in the periphery, yet Benjamin's presence had introduced a warmth, a kindness, and a sincerity that challenged old fears. Thomas understood that the path forward required caution, observation, and the willingness to explore emotions anew. Benjamin left the gathering with a sense of cautious optimism. He felt an unfamiliar anticipation, a readiness to continue discovering this connection. His mind replayed subtle moments, glances, gestures, and shared laughter that had conveyed more than words. He sensed the delicate nature of what was beginning to grow, aware that it carried both promise and complexity. Katherine's final glance as they departed confirmed her expectations. A spark had been ignited. It was tentative, unspoken, and fragile, yet unmistakable. The chemistry between Benjamin and Thomas had begun its quiet, inevitable course. The lingering shadow of Charles Donovan served as a reminder that the past was never far, yet it also highlighted the resilience, authenticity, and warmth that had begun to bloom in their present. The chapter closed with a final, lingering glance between Benjamin and Thomas, the unspoken acknowledgement of potential, tension, and emotion. Outside, the soft Orlando night whispered possibilities, and the unseen influence of the past reminded them that every spark carried both light and shadow.